The sad thing is the government makes it very difficult. So following from the press conference they had yesterday, where the spokesperson for the SSS was talking about people collecting money, people turning it into a franchise, using language that sort of ties also with sort of terrorist activity. It's really very unfortunate. I think one of the things would be very clear from the very beginning that this is not citizens versus the government. This is citizens asking the government to work with its citizens against a common enemy. But unfortunately, the government has consistently made it a sort of us versus them campaign, saying that we're criticizing, we're victimizing, we should focus on Boko Haram. So it does make it difficult to believe, or to want to believe, that the government is doing all it can to bring the girls back. But as citizens, that is the best that we can do, is to put pressure on them that this is your constitutional responsibility, especially Mr. President. And yeah, that it's their constitutional responsibility to protect lives or property, and lives are in danger, not just the Chibok girls, but also people in the northeastern part of the country. I think what as someone describes it, that basically inaction has emboldened, or seeming inaction, if we put it that way, has emboldened the agents of terror. Because at the end of the day, if no one gets caught, no one gets reprimanded, then people get boldened to continue to do their dastardly acts. We have reassurances that they're working. A military official, I forget which one, stated that they do know where the girls are. So you do get some mixed signals. There are some successes that have been advertised of them capturing Boko Haram members or things like that. So you do get some of these things, but in the grander scheme of things, because there is not one voice, so one government official will say something one day, another government official will say something the other day, it does raise doubts around exactly what is the holistic approach and unified approach to this fight against terror. And as citizens, the only thing we can consistently say is that it is the role of the federal government, not the role of Boko Haram to release the girls, but the role of our government to work with our citizens. And because at the end of the day, for example, in the northeastern part of the country, people know who's not members of they know who's not a member of their community, but they wouldn't trust the government official, because if I get victimized for sharing information, next time I won't share information with you. So again, it's still, the responsibility still lies primarily with the government to make sure citizens feel safe enough to share information, and also to show that they are protecting citizens. So the girls were kidnapped starting 11 p.m. the night of the 14th into the 15th. I believe it was on the 15th or the 16th that Mrs. Ezekwesili, she's quite active on Twitter, basically said, look, we can't continue to look helpless and powerless. Why don't we try and galvanize all these ideas we're talking about on social media and present it to government? So over a 2-day period, we had about 1,000 tweets and some posts on Facebook as well. Just citizens sharing what they think based on what they know and what they've read and seen would be ways for government to deal with terrorism. All of that was synchronized into 10 action points, as we call them. And they include things like just tracking money. I mean, terrorism is fueled by cash. So what measures have we put in place to track how money is being spent? And equipment. Every Boko Haram story, for example, has a Hilux van in it. 40, 30, 20. Cars don't drop from the sky. Who sells Toyotas in this country? Can we track who's buying them in large numbers, for example? Another thing we talked about was making sure that our soldiers are properly equipped for the work we send them out to do. They have signed up to the military. That means they've signed up knowing fully well that they might lose their lives. But it is a violation of their human rights for us to send them out to the field ill-equipped. If I have the right gadgets that I need and you send me out and something happens and I die, yes. But if you just send me out blind, I don't have enough guns, I'm not sufficiently protected to do the work, then you're basically sending me out to die. And then furthermore, their family members. What is in place for them if they die, that their family members are protected? Numerous stories of soldiers being kicked out, families being kicked out of barracks within a week or sometimes a month after their husbands died. That's not the way to treat people, and it would dismotivate me from wanting to give up my life if I know that my family would not be taken care of. For soldiers who died gallantly in the face of war, what do we have? Do we have a what? I mean, I've been in this country for over 30 years. I don't remember seeing any award ceremony honoring gallant service for any of our soldiers. So those kind of works our motivation, and that also ties with our budgeting. I mean, budget last year for the military was ₦1 trillion. Yes, not all of it was dispersed, but the ones that were dispersed, what was done with that money? Another thing we talked about is what we had mentioned earlier about community policing and trusting members of the community. How often do the soldiers interface with community leaders in terms of sharing information, providing a channel of trustworthy information sharing on both sides? The National Assembly. Yes, their primary role is passing bills, but they do have the powers to summon. They can summon the defense chiefs, they can summon Mr. President, and since they are elected representatives, we're asking them to set up regular meetings that's like a security report, a security update to citizens and say this is what is going on, this is how we're working. So those are some of the 10 points that we came up with. Some of them are even just around social issues. So I mean, we know that farming has more or less stopped in the northeast, fishing has more or less stopped. So how do they expect people to survive? What is the government doing to ensure that people that are left behind are able have a livelihood of some sort, or source of living that can eat? We hear reports that people are hungry and starving and having to move around because their livelihood has been cut off. So those are the things that we came up with and say, look, these are citizens' ideas of what citizens think should be done. We sent it to every stakeholder, Mr. President, Senate President, Speaker of the House of Rep. We have 2 governors' forums, we sent it to both. We sent it to Chief of Defense Staff, National Security Advisor. Not one person has responded, except for one of the governors' forums actually called to follow up on the document to acknowledge receipt of it. So, and then this is in addition to at least 5 different reports that have been commissioned over, committee reports that have been commissioned over the last, I guess, 5-6 years on Boko Haram. So solutions abound, but it just seems that there's a lack of willingness to actually do what is necessary. There does need to be an audit. I mean, I think one of the things that held former President Obasanjo in good stead was he had a military background as well. So he understood how the system works. Unfortunately, Mr. President, I mean, through no fault of his own, doesn't have that kind of experience or background. But without that background, no one needs to tell you that something is amiss. I mean, you don't need to be a genius to figure out that something is amiss within our security structure. And we've seen also in the last 2 weeks, almost the soldiers almost, what's the word I want to use? Almost disregard for the fact that we are in a democracy. Almost them wanting to do things their own way, on their own terms. So we start with them confiscating newspapers and cars. I mean, the executive didn't know anything about it, or so they said, but the military thought there was a threat and they were bold enough to do that unilaterally. We have the state of the Ekiti elections. I mean, intense militarization of an environment, reports of people being able to call and you weren't quite sure if you were getting the military or people just in military uniform. Then you have the incident in Lagos a week ago where soldiers burned their private property because one of them had been hit. Yes, it's unfortunate of a loss of life, but that does not give people who are supposed to work on that strict code of ethics the right to then vandalize property. And then obviously the spokespeople said that that wasn't the case, that it was area boys. And my question to that, even if it was true that it was area boys that vandalized, what were the military doing? That means they stood by and watched it happen. And in a sense, silent consent of what was going on if they believed it was truly against the law. So there are fundamental challenges within the military. So one is the audit of how much has been allocated, and if Mr. President sees there is a reason to remove, I mean, I'm not very familiar with the structure, but if work is being supposed to be done and you don't see results, then you look at who do you have in charge and what are the handicaps that's not ensuring that this work is getting done. I mean, there are numerous reports of, I mean, you hear reports of children, of senior officials in the military who live very flamboyant lives in Lagos and in London. I wonder where, I mean, obviously, and it's always obvious because they were not doing it before their parents came into office. So it's suddenly a flush of cash has come into their lives and they're spending it any which way they want. So there are fundamental issues. And again, responsibility lies with Mr. President. He's Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Yes, he doesn't have a military background, we understand that, but that's part of why you belong to a party, that's part of why you belong to a cabinet, that's part of why you have the Council of States. Muhammadu Buhari is part of the Council of States, Obasanjo is part of the Council of States, all of them are former heads of state military, and they have offered to help. So how are we leveraging their knowledge, their resources, to put an end to this madness? Will be a lot more militarist, I think. I think the Minister for Police Affairs is from Osun State. There is I mean, we can't run away from it, even though we're supposedly a federal state. There is intense presidency interest in the outcome of, there was in the outcome of these 2 elections. Osun, a lot more so as well. We've also seen, even though as ministers, they should be sort of party neutral. Someone in the position of Minister of State, and Senator Obanikoro, who's a card-carrying member of PDP, really has no business, to be honest, being involved in elections because he is partisan. So you cannot put someone in charge of your armed forces who is obviously and unashamedly partisan. There's no way he's going to discharge his duties on an objective manner. So Osun, for us, raises concerns. It's a much larger state. And the dynamics also slightly different. And I mean, the momentum from Ekiti, supposedly blocking a sitting governor from entering the state with no apologies and no repercussions. I mean, those are issues that then makes one really wonder what might happen. I mean, already we're going back and forth about the plans of PDP to rig. But if any party has control of the military, can deploy at will in whatever format, and the person sitting on that apparatus is a card-carrying member of a party that has a stake in this game, it is hard to believe that their actions will ever be objective. And that for me is a major issue. Well, let's see if we have elections in 2015. It's unfortunate, but the climate of insecurity, I mean, if it continues at this pace, quite honestly, I'm not quite sure we would have elections in 2015. Not only, I know we could have elections, let me put it that way, but in terms of participation of citizens, people who would choose to go out. Now, for example, we're doing voter registration. We've already done about 10 states. Most people were not aware. The next phase is next month. Publicity and awareness is beginning to increase. The last one will probably be in September. So you have, first of all, a lot of people who might have wanted to vote, but they're not even aware of what the process is, who will participate. If places get increasingly insecure, will people be willing to come out and participate in the process? And at the end of the day also, who then gets thrown up? And if people will find a candidate that they believe would work for Nigeria. It's unfortunate. I mean, there's a lot of tension, there's insecurity, and because of the elections, a lot of it, everything seems to be tied to who wants to be in power, the words we like to use, take over power, be in power, but everything is about power, even though they're supposed to come and serve, but we hardly ever hear anybody say, I'm running for office so I can serve the good people of this so that we can be in power. So we'll see. Biggest thing, I mean, in the last 2 weeks we've seen Mr. President write an op-ed that's been ridiculed by a response. We've seen reports of us paying $1.2 million to a PR firm. It's not in the pictures, it's not in the articles, it's not in the PR. And unfortunately, the President has been, the Minister of Finance just did her tour of international news agencies and interviews. It's not in the talking, it's in the acting. Till to date, there is not a picture of Mr. President with the Chibok mothers or the SKPs. Now, he didn't go to Chibok for security reasons. We can debate that all we want. But they've been to Abuja. He lives in Abuja. So how hard could that have been? That fine, for whatever reason it was, he didn't go to Borno State. Take a picture with the mothers and the children. That, for me, would go a longer way than any of this spending 1.2 million naira, and it just shows empathy. Even if it's not him, even Mrs. Jonathan could have done it as the mother of the nation, quote unquote. So you have all these sort of low-hanging fruits that are not plucked, yet we choose to spend money and make noise over non-issues. The biggest thing in terms of fighting this war is sincerity. Sincerity of purpose, sincerity of action. So when we spend time saying APC is to blame, PDP is to blame, Boko Haram is being funded by, not one politician, well, yesterday they said they've arrested some, but they won't let their names be known. So it just shows that a lot of it's just politicking. So if something needs to push, and I think that's the roles of citizens just need to continue to push, to show them that this thing is beyond politics. And there's a campaign that a few people want to start, a few organizations are planning to start that says no girls, no votes. And this is not about no votes for Mr. President, it's about no votes for anybody, APC, PDP, APGA, anybody that's running for office. If you are in office now, you do not get a vote unless these girls are back. Because they need to understand that this is not just beyond something to while away time. That it speaks to the heart of how Nigeria treats its citizens if we don't take it seriously enough that 200 girls have been abducted. It makes up, I think the challenge is you can't, in a country where over 70% of your people live under $1, under 50 naira a day, hunger is major, poverty is major. So we cannot separate people's daily existence with their ability to think long term. So performance, planning, infrastructure development, those are also the long-term projects. So I build a road so that over time you can bring your goods from the farm to the city and get good money for it. It's not something you'll see today, but today I am hungry. Today I need to pay school fees. Today I need to fix my roof. So we can't separate the present needs of a population that's been kept in poverty and ignorance from painting them a picture of what is to come. And I think probably the successful politician over time will need to find a balance of both. Because yes, it might seem funny, oh, people gave their votes for a bag of rice, but we also cannot shy away from also the political terrain. I come in and make all sorts of promises, but once I get into office, I don't look back. So people feel the need that they want to get what they can now. So if you're promising me rice, I'll collect it today. If you're promising me money, I'll collect, because it's something I can see today. Once you get into office, I don't necessarily see you. So in terms of our politicking and our for Ekiti, I mean, there are all sorts of different phases. I'll use as an example. I'll use the teachers as an example that's come up in Ekiti a lot. And a friend of mine said this, which I thought was quite apt. So one of the things that Mr. Fayoshe said against Mr. Fayemi was that under him, the rate of pass in WAEC or NECO had gone down. Now, it's also a reflection of the teachers that were in the system. So a man comes in and sees that education is not quite great. We want to reform. Let's get new teachers in. Let's get them educated, increase their capacity. But people are saying, no, you should have waited till the second term. Now, that means you've left bad teachers in place for 4 years because you want to get re-elected in your next 4 years. So what's the balance? And at the same time, you get blamed for you have really bad quality of students passing exams. So there are a lot of pieces, but at the end of the day is finding a balance between the present needs of people and also sort of long-term developmental goals that would stand the test of time or stand them in for sort of growth and development for the future. The biggest thing is for citizens to really, really realize the power they have as citizens. I mean, we can't say this enough. Because at the end of the day, they're there because we voted them in. We voted them in. They're there spending our resources. They're there because they have a responsibility to efficiently use the resources that they have. But for most citizens, part of our history, part of our lack of civic education, we see government officials as people who are doing us a favor. Which is why when people commission a road or commission a water project, people are dancing and clapping and joyful. I mean, there's nothing to clap or dance about. They just did their jobs. That's what we pay them. So all these things should not be events. They should just be really 5-minute openings, we move on, and we go on to the next thing. But for someone to want to go open a water borehole, we'll do tents, we'll do banner, we'll do programs, we'll get dancers, in some places we'll do ashwebi, on top of what? So until we get, and I think for us it's just educating citizens and getting them to understand that this really is your money, your resources. And we're seeing a shift. I mean, not government, but a big sort of agency that's seen that before they were privatized was NEPA. Because citizens suddenly got angry at being billed unnecessarily with no service. So when they enter communities, they'll chase them away. But the protests this year, there probably were about 4 or 5 different protests to different NEPA offices. just saying that you can't give us a bill without providing service. So until those kind of pushbacks are consistent and citizens consistently show that we understand that we have the power of voice and numbers, then yeah, it's still a long road ahead.